GPN brings you the top stories from your backyard and from around the globe. War. The evil Tan Army is on the move again. Led by General Plastro, the elite Tan Guard are massing in several areas on the outskirts of Green territory. None of the preliminary Green patrols have returned. The threat of Tan invasion looms large. Top secret. Top secret video acquired by GPN shows the new Green Alpha Wolf Chopper Battalion preparing to mobilize. Their preparation is overseen personally by Colonel Grimm, the leader of the Green Forces. Sarge and the rest of Sarge's heroes are on call 24 hours a day, ready to do anything necessary to assist the Alpha Wolf Battalion in putting a halt to the Tan menace. Piloting our finest choppers are men like Captain William Blade. His record speaks for itself. Not only is he a top graduate from our secret helicopter pilot school, but he is pretty handsome as well. Hey, ladies? Invasion. Tan forces are on the move. Their ultimate destination at this time is unknown. But whether it is right here in our own backyard or in a strange foreign land, the pilots of the Alpha Wolf Battalion stand at the ready. Together, men like Captain and Sarge are ready to take on any challenge the Tan Army might present in their quest for world domination. The stakes have been raised, and the Green Army is prepared to take the battle to new heights. The time has come for Army Men Air Attack.
Army Men Air Combat, which is the Nintendo 64 title, initially released on PlayStation under the title Army Men Air Attack. I have no idea why they changed the name for the Nintendo 64 release, considering that the later Windows version still used the Air Attack name. Regardless, this is the second air-based game in the series, coming out a year before Air Tactics on PC. This is the game of the 3 on Nintendo 64 that I didn't have as a kid. So my first time playing this one was back in college, around 2012. While it took me a few minutes to get used to the helicopter's floatier controls compared to Sergeant Hawk and Sarge's Heroes, I was quickly sucked into what is definitely one of the best Army Men games in the series, alongside the 2 Sarge's Heroes titles. Maybe the secret to a good Army Men game is to put it on Nintendo 64. Air Combat is a follow-up of sorts to Sarge's Heroes, as it's set in that universe with those characters, rather than the Sarge in the original game's universe. You play as Captain William Blade, the Green Army's elite combat chopper pilot, as he goes on various missions to attack Tan bases, foil Tan plots, and rescue Green soldiers. The story is pretty average and a little disjointed, as the missions feel only loosely connected for the most part, but it does serve as a good introduction for Captain Blade, who would go on to be the protagonist in Army Men Air Tactics on PC, and Army Men Air Combat on Game Boy Color, and Army Men Air Attack 2 on PlayStation, PlayStation 2, and GameCube, which has a plethora of names depending on platform and region. The story may be the weak point, as is the norm in Army Men games, but the gameplay more than makes up for it. I've seen some people online rank it as the best game in the series, and while I am not prepared to put it above Army Men 2 or Sarge's Heroes 2, I will slot it in third place. Once you get used to the floaty feel and the strafing, the helicopter controls wonderfully, and the combat feels fluid and natural. In addition to your machine guns, you have an array of secondary weapons to use, like rockets, guided missiles, napalm, etc. There are 4 helicopters that you will unlock over the course of the campaign, each with their own different stats. You also have different co-pilots to choose from, each of whom have a weapon in which they specialize, thus boosting that weapon's damage. Air Combat, the Nintendo 64 version of the game, also has a console-exclusive additional co-pilot, Bombshell, who specializes in napalm. That's really the only difference I noted between the 2 versions. Even the visuals are only the slightest bit better on Nintendo 64, and that may well be my rose-tinted Nintendo glasses. This game is pretty impressive by PlayStation 1 visual standards. There's some good variety in mission objectives. Sometimes you have to destroy all Tan forces in an area. Sometimes you have to retrieve a particular item and bring it back to base. Sometimes you have to defend your base, and sometimes you have to rescue soldiers in the field before they're killed by Tan soldiers. I'm not going to say it never gets repetitive, but there is a decent amount of variety that I thought kept things fun and interesting throughout my playthrough. Speaking of my playthrough, it was pretty short, around 3 hours from start to finish. If I hadn't failed the last 2 missions so many times, it probably would have been about 2 hours. My only real complaints with the game are pretty standard for Army Men. The camera control isn't great, and there are some invisible collision hitboxes that get annoying. The camera is the same issue in Sarge's Heroes, so it's at least a familiar kind of jank. The invisible hitboxes, while also familiar from Sarge's Heroes, are much more irritating. In Sarge's Heroes, there were a lot of times where I'd be trying to shoot an enemy while being as minimally out of cover as possible, and having a clear line of sight to that enemy with my manual crosshairs. And my bullets would end up hitting an invisible piece of cover in front of me. The same kind of thing happens here, except instead of with shooting, it's with flying. I'll be trying to skirt around close to the side of a mountain to save some time and maintain my speed, and I'll get snagged on and stopped by the air, apparently. Still, though, those are my only 2 complaints with the game. The music is pretty good, the voice acting is as nostalgically cheesy as ever, and the game looks pretty good for Army Men. For this series, that's a pretty minimal list of complaints. Army Men Air Combat, or Air Attack if you're playing on PlayStation or PC, is a surprisingly good game. It's not just fun, it's a genuinely pretty good game. It's not a graphical shocker, it's still Army Men, and the controls aren't perfect. But it's a pretty great game. The difficulty ramps up pretty evenly and fairly throughout the game's 16 levels, and while I think the last 2 or 3 missions are a little excessively brutal, especially the last mission, that's a pretty minor thing. It's got the general jank and shallow story of most Army Men games, but it's genuinely fun, and my only complaints with the game are pretty minor. I 100% recommend playing it just kind of in general, and it's an absolute must-have for Nintendo 64 collectors. And if you're a PlayStation collector, it's still definitely a game to consider. My rating for Army Men Air Combat, or Air Attack, on Nintendo 64, PlayStation, and PC is a B.